Hi y'all, and welcome to episode 31 of Mad Knitting. My name is Susan. My pronouns are she, her, hers. If you don't know why I announce my pronouns at the beginning of every video, there's an article about that in the description box right below. It's basically to express my support for the LGBTQ and community, particularly non-binary and trans people, for whom pronouns are not always obvious and are sometimes a difficult thing because people don't always want to acknowledge that gender is fluid for some people. Anyway, you can find me elsewhere online as madtownmama, mostly Ravelry and Instagram, and I would love to see you there. I started this channel a little over a year ago because I just really wanted to spend more time talking about crafting and the things that I am baking. And it just seemed like YouTube was the good place to do that. Long ago, I had a knitting blog back when like everybody had a knitting blog or a crafting blog of some sort. And it kind of seems like those fell out of favor as people moved to social media, and now YouTube is the thing. And I really enjoy that, I have to say. I really love watching people talk about what they're making or showing off their stash or talking about their plans or what have you. It's a nice way to chill, have some downtime, and of course it's hands-free, so I can knit while I'm watching. So that's a benefit. I have caffeinated tea today because it is very gray outside. It's been a real bummer of a January weather-wise. I think I said I live in Madison, Wisconsin, so I'm in the upper Midwest, and we should be having really cold and snowy weather right now, but thanks to climate change, we're not. It's really mild, and it's gray, and it's gloomy, and it's just kind of gross, and it's sapping all of the energy out of me. So, caffeine. I'm squeezing in an episode today. It's Tuesday, January 17, 2023. And I'm squeezing in an episode today because this is the one day my kids go to school this week. They had yesterday off for the Martin Luther King holiday. They have Friday off because it's the end of the semester. And the next 2 days, there's really no point in them going to school. They're both in high school, and starting in 2020 with COVID, or the 2020 and 2021 school year, the high schools did away with finals, just because with virtual learning and all the changes and upheaval, they thought it really wasn't fair to make the kids take finals, which was fine. So what they had instead was what they call Bridge Week, which is an opportunity for kids to catch up if they're behind or what have you. So they've continued that even though they're back in school full-time in person. And if you are caught up academically, there's really no point in going to school for those days that normally would have been set aside for finals. And my kids are not way behind in their classes, so I will make up an excuse for them to stay home. And yeah, they basically have no school this week. So that's why I'm squeezing this in today. Just because I'm more comfortable talking to my phone camera when nobody else is around. Nobody in my house like makes fun of me or thinks this is dumb or anything, but like I just feel self-conscious when people are around and I'm doing this. So anyway. Okay, so I am a knitter. I knit a whole lot, and I do other things too. Like occasionally I will sew or quilt or what have you. I don't really crochet, but I did know how once upon a time in my very young life. So that's what I do. I knit and knit and knit, and I like to talk about it. I will be sharing a few knitting projects today, and I actually have some more sewing projects to share because while I don't do resolutions or even goals, I do have loosey-goosey ideas for what I want to do in a year. And in 2023, I decided, you know what? I really want to sew more. I didn't do enough of that last year. And so that is one thing that I would like to do more of this year. And so far, I've been keeping up with that. I'm going to start by telling you about what I'm wearing. This was a work in progress in my last episode. And I had finished, last time I recorded, I had finished all of the knitting, but I hadn't blocked it or grafted it. So let me take it off to show you. It's a cowl, obviously. This is called the Willa Cowl, and it's by the designer Karel, also known as Casey Knitting Co. And I think it took me less than a week to finish the knitting part from start to finish. The grafting took another few days. But it was so much fun to make. I actually started in the car on the way home from our holiday travels. And it's such potato chip knitting, as color work tends to be. But if you look, you can see that the motifs here, kind of looks upside down. This is some kind of an insect. I like to think of it as a cicada, but I'm not even really sure what she intended. Anyway, but if you look, you can see that there are different motifs, and this whole sequence only repeats twice. So, except for this little sort of check mark part that shows up every so often, you're only following the chart twice through before you're done. So it just felt like it knit itself. It was really fun. I chose to do a twist. So the construction of this is that you start with a provisional cast on and you knit in a tube all the way until you're done. If you wanted it really long, I guess you could add another repeat, but I liked it the way it was, so I didn't. And then when you're all done with the knitting, you graft it. So this, I don't know if you can even see, but this is where I grafted between these little checker things and the bugs. And I think I did a pretty good job. It took a while because there were many stitches. And the funny thing about that was that I didn't really have like 2 hours at a time to set aside, or I don't know how long it took, but anyway, I didn't have a long enough chunk of time to set aside to do the grafting. But I kind of had it set up on a table and I got started, and then I thought, you know what, if I have to put this down, how am I going to remember what point I'm at? Because to graft, you have to go you have your needles. If you haven't done this before, like on the toe of a sock or on a continuous cowl, you've got 2 sets of stitches, okay? And you've got parallel needles, and you have to work through the front stitch and the back stitch. So the stitch on the front needle, okay, backwards. The stitch on the front needle and the stitch on the back needle, you have to loop through those twice in order to complete the graft. And there's a particular order, whether you're going in the front or the back. And I can do it, I don't need to look up the instructions, but if I stop halfway through, it's really hard to tell what point I was at. So I figured out that I would graft for a little while, and then if I had to stop and go do something else, take care of something else in the kitchen or whatever it was, I would leave the needle, my darning needle, sticking out of the stitch. Because that way I could see which stitch I was in and which direction I was going. And when I did that, I knew at what point I was at in the grafting, and then I could pick it up and come back to it. So I'm not saying that I did an absolutely perfect job, but it looks fine. And I can always stick that part in the back of my neck under my hair where nobody's going to see it anyway. And as long as there weren't any stitches lost, I figure it's all good. So that is this cowl. I absolutely love it. I forgot to bring the labels and stuff, but the yarn I used is a combination of Knitpicks palette in the color Finley Heather. That is this background gray color. And the contrast color for the color work is 2-ply Highland fingering from Perwinkle sheep. So she's a hand dyer based in upstate New York somewhere. And the beautiful thing about this periwinkle sheep yarn is that a year ago, the end of 2021, for my birthday, completely out of the blue, somebody sent me 2 skeins of this yarn, this beautiful purple color, which is called plum, and then another one that's like a sort of a hot red, like chili pepper red color that I still haven't decided how to use that one yet, but it's gorgeous. I wasn't expecting it. It was a total surprise, and it was just a very, very kind, sweet thing that somebody did. So it just, it made my day, and I'm so happy that I used it in this project that I'm so happy with. So the last thing I will say about this project is that I made it as part of the Self-Indulgent Knit Along, which is hosted by the Yarniacs podcast. I've talked about it before. I talked about it last episode. I talked about it last year. But just to bring you up to speed, in case you don't know, the Yarniacs podcast is an audio podcast. They've been doing this for a really long time, and they host a knit along around the same time every single year, starting with the December solstice and ending in the March equinox. And the whole idea is that you should make something that is self-indulgent. They call it a knit along, but it can be, crochet or weaving or whatever. But the whole point is that it should be something that you really enjoy, that you really want to do. So it can be something for yourself. It can be using yarn that feels really indulgent and luxurious, or it can be a pattern that you've always wanted to make. Whatever it is, the whole point is to enjoy yourself. Not to be selfish, but to enjoy it. And I did. I enjoyed absolutely every stitch of this. So this was my entry. The knit along goes all the way until March 20 or so, whenever the equinox is. And I wish that I could say I was going to spend the next 2 months knitting only things for myself, but that's not the case. It's okay. I will share what I'm working on though. Let's see. I think, you know what? I realized I always forget to talk about what needles I'm using. So for this, I used size 3 needles and size 4 needles. I had to go back and forth, which was a little bit annoying, but I find that I always have to go up 1 size for stranded color work, because otherwise it pulls in a little bit. And between each of the color work motifs is like 3 rounds of plain. So I don't have interchangeables. I used to, but I don't like them, so I don't use interchangeables. Anyway, so I was just going back and forth between size 3 and size 4, and I didn't check gauge because it's just a cowl, but I am very happy with the fabric and the size it came out, so win-win. All right, let's move on to knitting works in progress. Now, I wish I could show you the socks I am making myself. I wish I could show you the sweaters that I started like last fall, but I've made basically 0 progress on those because I've kind of gotten pulled into some other things. So I will come back to those eventually, but there's no point in showing you until there's something new, some progress, significant progress made. So the first whip is like, why am I even showing you this? I haven't made that much progress on it. But I talked last time about making socks for my son because he failed sock inspection at his last orchestra concert. And because they weren't black enough, like dark charcoal apparently didn't cut the mustard for the dress code. Had to be black. And obviously I could buy him black socks, but why buy him black socks when I can make him black socks? So at great risk to my long-term vision, I purchased black yarn and I started a black sock, and it's as plain can be. And I think especially in the terrible light today, you probably can't see any of the details. So you'll just have to trust me that it is what I say it is. I'm using Knitpicks Stroll, which is nice and soft. I don't know that it's gonna hold up really well, but oh well, I guess that's just too bad. But but I use size 1 needles. I cast on 72 stitches. I do knit 2, purl 2 ribbing for about this much. Then I do plain old stockinette. My preferred heel is a flap, and I do the Eye of Partridge heel with a little ridge of garter on either side because that makes picking up the stitches easier, especially in black yarn. And then I do gusset decreases back down to the 72 stitches, and I knit until I get to the toe decreases. And I'm so close to being done with this. I mean, I started the toe decreases and I've got just a little bit left to go. I don't know if you can see very well here, but I've started the toe. So this is the first sock. It's really good meeting knitting. And I haven't had a lot of meetings since the start of the new year, which is actually nice because it means I've gotten other work done. But yeah, plain sock knitting is great meeting knitting. So that'll get done. His birthday is February 7. So I'm really hoping the socks are done by then. And I'm not sure when their next orchestra concert is. It's probably in February, maybe March. I don't know. They have 3 cycles throughout the year, and they did one in November, so the next one's not too far off. Okay, so that's the first work in progress. The second work in progress, I had not started or talked about this at all yet. So it's a commission of sorts. Someone I know, I don't want to get specific, has a new grandchild born in October, and she really wanted me, she's admired my knitting, and she really wanted me to make a sweater for her new grandchild. And said, can I commission one from you? And she's a person who does handwork herself, so she understands like the effort and work that goes into it. And I said, sure, because this is a person who means a lot to me, and who I know will like appreciate what goes into it. But the thing is, she was extremely specific about what she wants, like color, style, everything. And that's fine. Specific is good. It means that as long as I stick to her specs, like she'll be happy with it. But the child was born in October, like I said, but she wasn't like getting back to me about size and stuff. Well, it turns out that this baby is huge. So it's a good thing she waited, because if I'd made like a newborn or even like a 3-month size, like it just wouldn't have fit ever. So now this baby is what, 3 months old, 3.5 months old. And she said, you better make like a 12 to 18 month size because he's just huge. So the specifics were that she wanted a pullover, no buttons. She hates buttons for some reason. A pullover with a little bit of a rolled neck. She wanted it in a gray color. And then she wants an initial on the front, the baby's initial. So I knew that for a while, and she eventually told me what yarn she would like. Turns out we picked Knitpicks, again black yarn. This is Stroll tweed in the color Welly's Heather. You may recall that I made a ribbed hat out of this exact same yarn. So I only had 1 skein left, so I had to order more to make the sweater. That's all right. I'll be reimbursed for it. So then my next task was to find a pattern for like a plain pullover. The rolled neck I knew I could adapt, so I wasn't necessarily looking for that. But like a fingering weight plain pullover baby sweater. And you would be surprised how hard it is to find that. Like when I put in a search, you know, they all had other details, or they were knit at a loose gauge, or I don't know, it was just like not clicking for some reason. And the first one, I was almost not going to tell you the pattern that I picked at first because I hated it, but I'll go ahead and tell you. I started off with the sock yarn sweater by Hannah Fettig. Here's the one I printed out. I bought this, I think when it came out, like, gosh, 2009? 2011 is what this says. And I thought, okay, you know, Hannah Fettig, she's well known. I don't know if she's designing anymore, but hundreds of people have made this. It looks pretty straightforward and simple. I'll go with this. Well, I've made Hannah Fettig patterns before, I think, and they were fine. But this one, like, there is no neck shaping whatsoever. So the front and back are identical. And I'm sure that was on purpose to be simple, you know, to make it beginner friendly. But even for a baby, I just find that to be a very poorly fitting design choice. So if you don't do any kind of shaping to raise the back neck, then you're gonna have a back neck that dips down too far, and or a front neck that sort of pulls up, and it looks awkward. And it almost looks like a sweater's on backwards, even though there's no front and back. So that was one problem, but I thought, well, okay, I can work with that. I'll add some short row shaping. And I tried, and you know, it looked like a dog's breakfast. It was sort of flipping over. It just did not look good. So that was frustrating. So I just pulled it out and I kept looking for more patterns. I found one that was like the right gauge, and it had some short row shaping for the neck, but it had all this lace pattern stuff that I would have had to leave out. And then it occurred to me that Tin Can Knits has all of these basic patterns. I've heard iffy things about flax, which is the free like fingering weight top-down sweater. So I didn't want to make that one. But I remembered that there's Strange Brew book, which is basically instructions for 3 different gauges, any size, you know, with different colorwork patterns you could plug in. I remembered that this has a fingering weight version. And of course it comes in all sizes. So what I have done basically is look at the schematic and pattern for the basic top-down version. This actually gives you instructions for both top-down and bottom-up, whichever one you prefer. It gives you instructions for short rows for shaping that back neck. And they're optional, you know, if you don't want to do them or if it seems too complicated, you can leave them out. But anyway, I'm an experienced knitter, but I just needed something else to do the math for me. I didn't want to have to try to figure out all the sizing. So my gauge is exactly right. For the fingering weight sweater, it's 13 stitch. It's 6.5 stitches per inch. So over 4 inches, that's 26. So that didn't seem too loose. And I'm basically just following all the instructions, but I'm not adding any color work because that was not part of the request. After all that explaining, this is what I have. I have a blob of tweedy charcoal knitting that you're gonna have to trust me is the top of a baby sweater. So one modification I made was add just a few rounds of plain stockinette before I did the neck ribbing. You can't see it at all because it's dark in here and this is dark yarn. I'll have to show you next time when I have it done. But it's working. It's working. I did just a few rows of stockinette so it would roll over a little bit. I didn't want it to roll over a lot because I just think that, oh, can I just tell you, this sock yarn sweater, this Hannah Fettig one, she offered, like later, she offered like an extra set of instructions for if you want to add a cowl neck. And like, basically it's just adding a whole bunch of stockinette rounds before you do, you know, whatever you do to keep the whole thing from rolling. And I looked at the projects in Ravelry and they don't look good. That neck is huge and gapey. It just doesn't work. Not to bash any knitter, but I feel like that was just not good designing. Anyway, so I am using the Tin Can Knits pattern. You basically, it's a round yoke, so you do the neckband, and then there's different sets of increases for it to, you know, fit over the shoulders. Obviously I'm leaving out the color work, so I will have to just measure and make sure the yoke depth is right. So I'm following the schematic given in there. And when I get to the bottom of the yoke, that is where I will add the short rows to raise it. So when you are adding short rows to a, I suppose, either a raglan or a round yoke sweater, you have the choice of either doing it right below the neckband or at the bottom of the yoke right before you split for the sleeves. Or I suppose you could do a little of both. But for this, the instructions say to do it at the bottom of the yoke. I think it's so you don't get like a weird wedge shape if you're doing color work, because where it's where you have more rows in the back of the neck, sometimes you get this weird like smile wedge shape thing. So for this it wouldn't matter, but I'm just following their instructions because Tin Can Knits has yet to fail me. So fingers crossed this works. So what I'm going to do is knit the entire thing plain and then do duplicate stitch for the letter on the front. And my first and only attempt at duplicate stitching was those F-bombs that I made over the summer for my friend. And those looked like trash. Like for the F-bomb, it was fine, but my duplicate stitching was not good. I was just kind of trying to figure it out on my own. So I have found an instructional video on Very Pink Knits that it's pretty simple and it really lays it out. So I will watch that again before I do the duplicate stitching. But what she has requested is that I pick a color from the Tweed Flex, which are sort of, there's like a very light beige and kind of a medium tan. So I'll pick something pretty light colored and I'll use that, excuse me, to do that letter on the front. So, okay. So that is my commission project. I don't really know. I don't know how much to ask for. I mean, obviously I want to be reimbursed for the yarn. But like if I charge by the hour, like that would be a really freaking expensive baby sweater. And I don't like when knitting feels like work. So we'll see. I might just say, buy me dinner sometime or something like that. I knit when I want to, and I knit stuff that I want to knit. So it's kind of silly to ask to be paid for it because I don't want it to be my job. Which makes me think of that sock pattern that I keep saying I'm going to write, and I keep promising that I'm going to figure that out, and I haven't yet. And there's different reasons for that, but anyway, I haven't really moved on that either. Yeah, I just don't want to deal with test knitting. I don't know how to deal with compensating, compensation and yarn support. And I think that's all important, but I have to figure out a way to do that where it's not just costing me a bunch of resources. And I don't know. I don't have the brain space for that right now. I've got a lot of other things going on. Okay. We're not going to talk about the things I'm not doing. We're going to talk about the things I'm doing. So my next work in progress, I did talk about this last time. This is the sweater for my mom. And I was sort of having a conundrum at the time because there's like two of these. And I will show you why. Because I was trying to figure out all the modifications she wanted to make. Now, if you're new here, or if you don't remember, or if you need a reminder, the deal is my mom started a sweater for herself. It is called the Weekend Pullover. And I have somewhere in here, there's a black and white photo of it from the pattern. Here we go. It's by Michelle Rose Orne, published by Swan's Island Company. This pattern it's from a little while ago, I think. And one of the reasons you can tell is that it is not super size inclusive. I think it only goes up to about a 50 or 52 inch chest, which these days would not be acceptable. But anyway, that's the pattern she was working on, and there's a whole complicated cable situation happening on both the front and the back, and she kept getting lost in the chart and ripping it out and redoing it, and she got so frustrated she finally asked me to knit it for her. So I said, sure, that'll be your Christmas present. Obviously won't be done by Christmas because that's when I saw her to get the yarn and stuff. So I've been working on that, and one of the modifications she wanted, which I did talk about last time, is that she has a curve, like her spine is a little bit curved. She calls it a dowager's hump, which I think is such a funny, inelegant way to describe it. But it's just, a little curve in the spine that comes with age and osteoporosis. And so she wants short rows in the back to accommodate that so that the back of the sweater doesn't just flip out at the bottom. So that's the biggest modification to make. There are a couple other simple things, like the sweater pattern calls for A-line shaping. She doesn't want that. She just wants it straight up and down. She wants the neckline lowered a little bit, or raised. I can't remember. Anyway, some little adjustments to the neckline, which is fine. But at first, when I was thinking, and she knows where to put the short rows because she's done that before. So she gave me measurements, like go 10 inches into the body and then start the short rows, etc. So that's all fine. But I was getting a little hung up because this complicated cable chart is on both the front and the back as the pattern calls for it. So if you start adding short rows on one side, that means you're going to be along the sides, like that's where you do the turns. That means that you'd be at a different point in the cable charts for the back as for the front once you start those short rows. And I just wasn't sure that I could deal with that. And then I had an epiphany. It was actually right after I recorded my last episode, I was thinking about it later, and I realized I don't have to do the cable on the back of the sweater unless she really, really wants it. So I called my mom and I said, do you care if you just have the cables on the front? Is it okay if the back of the sweater is just plain stockinette? And she said, of course I don't care. Ding, 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 ding. It was like a big light bulb went on. So that's what I'm doing. This is what she had so far. And it's a little fuzzy because she had to rip it out so much, which is why I'm not using this yarn yet. I think she has a bunch of extra yarn. She got plenty extra. And because it had been worked so much, I didn't want to start by using the yarn that she had already been knitting with. This is Berroco Ultra Alpaca, by the way. I think I forgot to say that last time. So let me show you the yarn and then I'll go back to the sweater. So it's Ultra Alpaca. I love this yarn. It's half wool, half alpaca. It's in this beautiful heathery lavender color. I don't think there's a color name on this label. Yeah, it's color 6283. Doesn't it just scream 6283? It's soft. I've made sweaters out of this before that hold up beautifully. They don't pill, they hold their shape. It's just really nice. But she had ripped it out enough that it was starting to look worn. And she has labels so she would remember which was the front and which was the back, because that matters, where you are on the chart. Anyway, so when I cast on, this is my iteration of it. I just did a plain back. And I had to do a little bit of math for that because if you're a cable knitter, you'll know that cables make a fabric really dense, and your stitch gauge will be different with cables. So if this panel measures, I'm getting 5 stitches to the inch, that's my gauge with this yarn on size 7 needles, which means that to get the measurement across the back, I simply take the number of inches across it needs to be and I multiply that by 5 and I count for that many stitches on the back. The front is going to have more stitches than that because this is a pretty wide cable panel and it's going to pull in. So if I just left the same number of stitches as originally called for and didn't do the cable panel, that back would be too wide. I hope that makes sense. So I just looked at the pattern, looked at the measurements. Because of the A-line shaping, they tell you where the markers go on the sides, so it was pretty easy to figure out where it all goes. So I have a marker for the beginning of the round, markers to set off the cable section, a marker for the side, and then I've already done one set of short rows, so I have a little, I don't know if you can see it, but it's just a little, where is it? Here it is. Little light bulb marker here that shows where I put the short row in because they're pretty much invisible. I do the kind, I forget what it's called. I do the kind where you basically yank the stitch upside down. Like when you do the turn, I don't wrap it, I just pull it over the needle and I feel like it disappears then when you go back and knit it. I think that might be German short rows, I'm not sure. Anyway, when I learned how to do that, it was like a game changer for me because my short rows always looked terrible until I learned that method. So that's where I'm at with this. She has knit the sleeves or most of the sleeves, so I don't need to do the sleeves. I just need to do the main body. I'm not too far, I think, from the armholes. I have just a little bit to go before I do the armholes. And yeah, I just need to, follow the instructions for it's a set-in sleeve. So, there'll be like some binding off and like regular shaping for the armholes. Yeah. So once that's all done, I will block it, stitch up the shoulders, send it to her, and then she can finish the sleeves and sew them in. I'll probably do the neckband too, just to make it easier for her. So that is my last work in progress. I am looking forward to, I'm enjoying that sweater because the cable is fun, the yarn is really nice, and I'm making it for my mom. So that's just a nice feeling. But I'm really looking forward to finishing these things that I've committed and that have deadlines. The baby sweater has a deadline because this person is going to visit her grandchild in a few weeks. So I need to get it done in time for her to take it with her. The sweater for my mom doesn't have a deadline, but the sooner the better. And the socks for my son have a deadline just because, he's going to need them. So that's where I am with that stuff. Then I can get back to things for me, which I always enjoy. Okay, that's it for the knitting, but I have some more sewing to share. So settle in. I also feel like my voice is like kind of scratchy, so I'm drinking lots of tea. So let me show you this thing that's not done first, because I had started to talk about it last time. So I had mentioned that I picked up this fabric at Blue Bar Quilts, which is a store that I love. And I wasn't really sure what to do with it, so I just started playing around with quilt blocks from this book. It's called 100 Modern Quilt Blocks by Tula Pink. And it really is just, 100 different blocks that are kind of like this. There's a diagram that shows you how to put it together. There's one stitched up and photographed. And they're organized kind of by like either rectangles or crosses, cross designs, or triangles or whatever. So I had made a couple of them that looked just like this and put this border around it, and then that's what I showed you. And then I later decided that I did not like the border, so I pulled it off and I played around making some other blocks. So you can see there's different kinds. And I didn't do the same kinds both times necessarily. So I had 8 of them and I put them together and I thought, you know, maybe I'll make a tote bag. That could be nice. So I've gotten this far with it. I added strips between, like these 2 2x2 kind of arrangements. I added a strip down the side. It's maybe 3 inches before seam allowance, and a strip at the bottom so that it would have some depth. And that's as far as I got, because now I'm thinking about how to finish it up. It's rather large. The finished dimensions should be about 12 inches this way, 12 inches this way, about 3 inches deep, I think. Maybe it's 3 inches after seam allowance. Anyway, it's large enough that this could hold, if this was like a project bag, it could hold probably a sweaters project if it wasn't a terribly big one. And some other stuff, which means that fabric alone is too flimsy. So I need to find some interfacing, I think. I need to figure out what to do about handles. Because it's kind of big just to be a drawstring bag. Like, I think it could probably benefit from some handles to carry. I've contemplated perhaps putting like an extra layer, how do I say it? Like a drawstring closure at the top along with handles so that stuff doesn't fall out if you're taking it somewhere. And I've also contemplated adding a liner that has pockets in it, because it's big enough that I could see having like a couple of projects in it, or like say you have a sweater project but you have extra needles and notions and maybe a printed out pattern that you're sticking in there. So there's just a lot of features that I haven't totally settled on and I haven't finished yet. And of course, are there hundreds of bag patterns out there where I could have just like purchased something or watched a tutorial online? Yes. Have I followed any of those? No, I'm totally making it up as I go along, which is really fun, actually. It's really fun, and there's no deadline or particular purpose. I'm just doing it because I want. So I've let this marinate for just a bit while I contemplate exactly how to finish it. But I won't let it sit too long, because if it goes too much longer, I will like never finish it at all. But it's fun, and the fabrics are beautiful and kind of nighttime themed, and I've enjoyed that. While I was letting that sit and while I was kind of thinking about it, I found myself cutting a whole bunch of 2.5-inch squares with some of the leftovers and making some very simple project bags. So here's the first one I made. A lot of the same fabrics, as you can see. So there's this nighttime theme, there's this swirly business, couple different shades of like gold and mustard, and then this light gray. Coordinating fabric for the bottom. I do I think it's called a box bottom, where you sort of, I have an unfinished one that I'll show you. Let me show you the unfinished one so you can see. So what I do, this is just the outside of kind of a similar deal, only this has campfires in oranges and yellows. But what you do is you have your 2 squares or rectangles that you sew along the sides, and then you cut out a corner, a square corner at the bottom. And then to make it 3-dimensional and give the bag some depth, you'll sew it across this way. I don't know if that makes sense, but there's like gazillions of tutorials online that will show you how to do that in detail, so I won't explain it any further. But that's how I make project bags. And for this, I did add some very light interfacing to the lining to give it some body. And then I put in a drawstring at the top. So this is a good, you could put like 2 sock projects in here, or a hat, like if you had a colorwork hat with a few different colors, or like a baby sweater. It's a good sized project bag. I think it's about 10 inches this way. It's probably 10 inches across, 10 inches deep, and at least 3 inches deep. 10 inches wide, 10 inches tall, and about 3 inches deep. I don't know exactly, but that's the basic dimension. I didn't measure terribly carefully once I made sure the squares matched. That's another fun thing about making project bags and kind of improvising. So this is a very similar size. It needs lining and drawstring and everything, but you get the idea. You know, orange and yellow isn't necessarily like my go-to, but I kind of liked how it went with the campfires. And then the last project bag, I was at a thrift store the other day and I noticed this plaid fabric. It was like $2 for this big piece. And it's actually pretty nice. Like, it's nice quality fabric. It wasn't enough to make a shirt or anything. And it's very Halloween colors, right? But I liked it. And I don't know if you can see, but there's going both directions. There is some silver thread. There, you can kind of see the shine, which makes it like a little fancy. So, you know, since it was only a couple of bucks and I knew that I had this leftover very shiny silver fabric from something I made a few years ago. Don't know if that's showing up as shiny or not. You'll just have to take my word on it, I guess, because the lighting in here is so bad because it's dark and I don't have a fancy light and I don't know that I want to spend money on any equipment since I just do this for fun. Anyway, when the light's better, I'll get pictures and put them on Instagram. How's that? Anyway, so I have, I added like this black strip to just kind of break it up a little. And I have this bag too. So do I need all these project bags? No, but it's fun to have them, and they might be good for giving gifts. They might be good for prizes for something down the road. I don't know. It's kind of nice to make something without a purpose or a deadline, just because I'm enjoying myself and using the supplies that I have. So that's where I am with that. That is all I have to share today. I'm gonna try to, when I can, make videos every 2 weeks or so. Sometimes it stretches out longer than that, but then I find that I'm like going on and on for like an hour, and I think that's too long. I have a lot of things coming up. I actually have some piano gigs coming up in the next 3 months, which I'm excited about, but it's taking up some time. I have big projects for work, so no promises, but I will at least do my best to provide updates and, you know, talk about my crafting, because the other thing is, as life gets busy and stressful, making things with my hands is how I keep myself grounded and how I keep myself happy and balanced. So thank you for joining me. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.